in the 1950s, I forget the exact date, maybe 52, there was a coup in Guatemala. The CIA kind of took over the country basically to, help the capitalism. And the way they did that was crazy. They sort of they invented an invasion. They jammed the radio stations and they broadcast fake radio broadcasts about an uprising, which wasn't actually happening. And they were dropping leaflets from the sky, and they even installed speakers on rooftops to broadcast the sounds of war and the uprising and planes and this is all. It's incredible when we found out about that, because it's entirely true. It's documented in academic texts, and it's such an audacious and scary thing that a government would do to another country. Anyway, part of that is based on there's a sort of research paper which suggests that the 65 days is the amount of time of broadcasting jamming or freezing a country's communications technology to 65 days is the amount of time needed in order to destabilize something. The idea was taken from that whole story, the idea of the amount of time that's needed to break down a civilization. It's quite a scary length of time. There's more interesting stories on the internet about where the band name came from that are much more interesting than our story, but we quite like the fact that there's so many different rumours about where the name came from. It's more interesting than just being some. We always struggle with how to make our music political. That's a very difficult thing to do, because, well, for a start, we don't have any singing, and also there's a lot of people whose, I don't know, political music has this very unfortunate baggage attached to it. It's often quite folky, quite old-fashioned, and the lyrics might be really great about explaining a particular issue, but the actual music, for me anyway, it doesn't excite me, and it can often come across as quite earnest or a bit preachy, because we certainly don't pretend to have any answers to any of the problems, but we do want to acknowledge the problems, because the world that we're living in right now seems to be getting worse and worse in a lot of places, and that's something that should be addressed. And we don't try and address it too explicitly, because I think we do that quite badly, but it certainly influences us more than. I mean, when we get asked the question about...
It's not so much that the music is political, because, like Paul says, it's quite hard to... If anything, we almost keep the music away from that. It's more that politics and the way things are shouldn't be as removed from people's everyday lives as it is in, like, 2014, because it seems to have been really removed. It's something that people aren't asked to get involved in. You have to kind of opt in rather than opt out of being politically active, and it seems like there's many really difficult things happening, and at least some of those things seem like they wouldn't be happening if people were involved just on an individual level. I read something, I can't remember what it was that I read really recently, but like the idea that politics is part of your identity, and you have kind of almost like a duty to be involved as an individual is an idea that's gone, that's disappeared, and the politicians they're not interested in.
They prefer it.
In reminding you of that.
Yeah. Last summer, we did our first sound installation
Oh, yeah.
in Sheffield, and we were making that. It was an album, a song from the album that we turned into a bigger project. It was like a 30-minute piece.
We made a video. So we made this.
Yeah, we made, like, there was accompanying visuals to the installation, and we were making it during the time that Edward Snowden released all of, his wealth of information. And it was really interesting because we really wanted to use it, but we also didn't know how to use it, but felt we couldn't ignore it, because everything that we were trying to build into this installation was it was sort of we were just trying to express our confusion, or almost like trying to articulate how inarticulate we are about all of these things, rather than trying to say this is wrong, this needs to happen. We're just kind of trying to say, like,
I think maybe art and music is useful to kind of mirror what's going on, because our experience of trying to articulate what Paul's trying to articulate is that actually more and more, rather than individual causes, I think a lot of those things are really interconnected and indicative of very similar symptoms. And so there's almost like there's becoming a really big bureaucratic mess that's actually really easy to target, because you can see it. It's so huge, and one thing relates to another. That actually, I think, whereas maybe music in the past has been behind certain movements, I think maybe the best job that you could do as a musician or any sort of artist is just to highlight or mirror or remind people that that it's happening, it exists. Well, we kind of got together to write music for. We were obviously really young, and I was really young. I was at college, and I was introduced to Paul, and we were just trying to write really noisy music. Well, what did you?
I came from the electronic music background, and Joe came from the guitar music background, and it was just at that time, about 2001, there were some really exciting things happening in guitar music for us for the first time in a long time. Bands like At the Drive-In and Trail of Dead. At the age we were, there was just this really exciting guitar movement. But then at the same time, that moment in time for electronic music was incredible, because it was a really big change where laptops became affordable and powerful enough to do really interesting things, and there was a lot of really exciting electronic music. People like Kid 606, Aphex Twin, of course, though he'd been around for a while, and record labels like Tiger Beat 6. Suddenly there was lots of brand new sounding noisy electronic music, but the live show was still just a guy behind a laptop that wasn't very interesting at all. So the really quite simple idea for us to get started was because we were all listening to all of this music, but no one seemed to be putting the two things together at that moment, and so we just started making noisy guitar music and noisy programmed sampled beats. And
that's almost kind of happened while we have been in a band. It's like now the technology is there. I mean, we have a couple of computers on stage, and from that we can kind of do loads and loads of
we've kind of gone in a big circle.
We've gone in a
really.
huge circle, yeah.
Like, I remember I was just about old enough to know what it was like. When I started university, I spent all my student loan on a sampler to learn how to do it, and at the time you had about 40 seconds of samples that you could play with, and you had to build a whole song out of a very small. There's a lot of limitations, and very quickly that disappeared entirely. You could do whatever you could imagine, but I'm really glad that I started to learn how to do it when there was still a lot of parameters that you had to work inside, because it's a good discipline to have. I think it's probably similar to if a filmmaker had to shoot on film and how expensive and time consuming that was, versus today when you just press the button on your iPhone and it's all there. So, and it's great, the new technology is great, what it allows you to do, but I think it's still very useful to have those the original principles, original ideas.
I think we very rapidly developed. I mean, there's more than just the two of us in the band. There's another two dudes, and we've between us developed a really good. I don't think we're like other bands in that we're not trying to do anything. We listen to so much stuff individually that we're not trying to do anything that anybody else is doing. We've got this kind of vocabulary between us of what works and what doesn't. And the technology side of things is like, well, it's interesting, isn't it? But the people that I meet that are the most clued up on, well, anything, but using computers or even playing the guitar, you know, the most technically advanced people are often play it with the least sort of soul, I suppose, or the least. Whereas if you just have the stuff and you use it in the wrong way, or you know, kind of just mashing it together, you often come out with something really like quite raw and
I think it's kind of, it's got to.
I'm not saying we're like.
No, like punk music.
Yeah.
Like a guitar is an incredible invention that's taken so like hundreds of years to develop into a thing. But now it's such a user-friendly way of making music quite quickly, and I think technology's it's kind of done that in a different sort of way. It's very easy now to get started making music without really understanding what's happening underneath. But all of that can come later. I think if you're using it in the right way, it can be a really good tool. It's very easy. Anyone with a laptop can load up some software and make music. And to begin with, that music will sound like everybody else who's using a laptop to make music. But at least you can get started, and then
the human.
Yeah, the trick is to find your own voice with these tools, I suppose. And learning academically or theoretically, it can certainly help to a degree, and I'm sure for other people that works really well. For us specifically, well, I have grade 1 piano, but I have no other qualifications. I think you did some cello, right?
Yeah, I played the cello when I was young, but
all of the instruments that we actually play, we've just sort of learned as we go.
I mean, writing a record is hugely, for us anyway, is time-consuming, and really we're on as a band, we're on a really long learning curve where the stuff we're writing now is really exciting to us. Like, we feel we're just starting to really write together really, really well, and understand each other on that sort of level that you need to. Whereas I guess lots of bands don't feel like that after 6 records. No. So some do, but not all. So we're really lucky.
I think it's really nice as well how we're starting to separate the two things more and more.
Yeah.
In the beginning, or for the first few records, we were always quite frustrated because our live show always felt better to us than anything that we could catch on record. But as we've learnt and gone and made more and more records, the two disciplines seem quite. Obviously, there's lots of similarities, but there's different approaches for each thing. And so, for the last record in particular, we had kind of the studio version of the song, and then the live version of the song, the same song, but different approaches. And it helps that we don't have any singing, because it opens the songs up a little bit. The same for 4 people.
Yeah. But being the we have had guest musicians.
Yeah, we get our good friend Frank, who is our guitar technician. We've made him come on and play some songs with us on extra guitar, because on the record we just added more things.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the same 4 of us really.
We've used an organ, I think, and various percussion instruments on records before, but we've never had kind of the budget for strings or anything like that. But I mean, again, there's quite I mean, there's a lot you can do with technology. You can write string music on technology if you're very careful to make it sound either knowingly fake or expensively real. But you don't need. There's things you can do. But as a band, I think our sound is becoming less and less expansive in terms of. It's becoming tighter in terms of the number of instruments that we use. We're much more interested in placing individual sounds in arrangement and production based around a set of instruments that we know really well, rather than the sort of limitless possibilities of computers and stuff. And that's taken a long time for us to learn that, I think. I mean, you then taking that on tour, I mean, you need to be able to play most of what goes on, but again, we don't limit ourselves. Going on tour then playing live is an amazing way of kind of connecting with people, and obviously it's we're really lucky to be able to come to Budapest or all the hundreds of places that we get to go every year, because you get to travel and stuff, and playing live's like the reward, I guess, for all that work.
So you are very often on tour?
Yeah, we have been over the last 10 years, on and off. And then you go away and write the record and then go back on tour. And the north of England is it's a
pretty friendly place.
Friendly place, and it's fairly switched on as places in England go to. Yeah. Feel like you're living in reality most of the time.
A lot of history there.
Yeah, but we're not. I mean, that's just where we live. So
it's always struck us that we're not a very geographically centric band. We don't really identify with that in the way that other bands do, especially bands from Sheffield. Bands like Pulp and Arctic Monkeys. They've got this very definite
identity.
Sheffield thing.
Yeah.
We don't really have that. Which is nothing against Sheffield, it's just I think the way that we developed alongside the way the internet developed, I suppose, over the past 10 years meant that the kind of stranger music like ours that's less poppy, it can find different outlets, and so there's lots of little pockets of people all over the world instead of having that kind of one city identity. But that's fine. We do better in some countries than others, certainly. When we go to Russia, we play bigger shows than we do in England. I don't know how that happened, but it happened.
Japan and
Japan's quite good for us.
Belgium. We play quite big shows in Belgium. Not so big in England. Yeah. It's quite small in England.
I mean, I think maybe like the internet, it's really changed so much that people still haven't worked out, and I think probably Russia, because the music piracy is so big and good and organised in Russia, it really helps a band like us, because we don't sell any records, but a lot of people know our music very, very well and they love it, and so when we go and play the shows, lots of people come to the shows.
We've never felt the benefit of those sort of revenue streams or whatever. We've always kind of made records on small budgets, and so in a sense, maybe it's too early to tell. I think the most obvious thing that will happen is that the big controlling kind of corporate labels will fall. I think possibly it's quite democratic for independent music, but you have to have somebody helping small bands out. There has to be money to help that get started, and I think that's what's going to.
Yeah, it's almost the wrong question. It's the wrong question. It's not. Is it a problem? It's because it's happened.
Yeah, there's
no way that it's going to unhappen.
You can't put the lid back on.
The question should be like, what next? What should we do?
Yeah.
What should new bands do? Not how do we fix it, because it's broken. It's already broken.